everyone, welcome to SFFCon and the Plotting versus Pantsing panel. I'm Christina Gruhl, author of the In Blood and Fire series, and I'm going to let everyone introduce themselves, starting with Amy, A.K. Duboff.
Hi, so I am Amy Duboff, and I write under E.K. Duboff. I am most known for the Catacomb space opera universe, and I have several book series in that. It's all in the space opera and space fantasy vein.
Rick?
Oh, okay. On my screen, I'm not the next one. My name is Rick Partlow. My best known series would be the Drop Trooper series. I also have The Earth at War, Glory Boy, Recon, and a whole bunch of others, mostly military science fiction.
Andrew?
Hi, I'm Andrew Dobell, and I mainly write urban fantasy, science fiction, and a few other genres, and I'm a plotter.
Jeffrey?
Hi, I'm Jeffrey H. Haskell. I'm best known for my superhero series, Arsenal, the Full Metal Superhero. I have a couple other superhero series, Bella series in the works, and I also write military science fiction. And I'm both a pantser and a plotter, and I love both of them.
You know, I have discovered that in my research for this, that's called a plantser.
I was wondering if they had a name.
It does.
Plotster I like better. Plotster works better.
Yeah.
But Potter.
I like plotster. I'm a plotster as well. What are you, Amy?
I tend to be more of a plotter, but I keep it loose in some aspects of it. So I have my big story
as well.
Yeah, I guess I'll leave the details open, but I have my big arc figured out in advance. I'd say.
Yeah. What about you, Rick?
I am definitely a plotter now, although I started out back in my first 6 books or so as very much a pantser.
When did you change?
Because I wanted to make a living at it. Back when I used to do Seat of the Pants, each book took me 9 months to a year.
Wow.
So
cool.
Now, like last year, I wrote 12.
Wow, that's impressive. I hope I can get to that point, but my children need to go back to school instead of being here in the house schooling, because that really
Rick doesn't have that problem. His biggest distraction is his dogs and the fact that he lives in Florida.
And my daughter just graduated. My daughter was my youngest, and she just graduated high school. So
my oldest graduates high school next year, and my youngest starts kindergarten this year.
Oh wow, that's a big gap.
Right.
So it sounds like you changed because it was taking a long time. Did you have any other issues when you were pantsing it?
It really was just the length of time. I mean, I really enjoyed it. Honestly, I enjoyed pantsing a lot more than I enjoyed plotting. It felt more like I was reading the book than writing it. Like I was watching a movie with these characters unfolding in front of me in slow motion. And that was a lot of fun, but you know, I tried plotting my 7th book and wrote it in 3 months. And I'm like, I could probably work a lot faster if I did this all the time.
Anyone else a recovered pantser?
Well, you know, it's so funny is that pantsing for me was never about, oh, this is so much fun, I love doing this. Because when I first started writing, I really actually hated the act of writing. I couldn't stand it. The sitting in front of the keyboard was my least favorite part of the process. Now it's my most favorite part of the process. But the pantsing for me is I have loved story and storytelling my entire life. I'm always the DM in our RPG games. I've always been trying to write stories or screenplays or study movies. We're the family who, after the movie is over, we spend 2 hours talking about like things they could have done better or things they did well, what story element worked and why, that kind of thing. So I've always been in love with storytelling, so I have sort of an intuitive grasp of storytelling. So it's really easy for me to sit down and write a book without having to plot it. So pantsing always came really natural to me. The problem I ran into was when the books needed to be longer. There's only so much information you can keep in your head. Most of my superhero novels are between 50 and 60,000 words. In February, I had a big YouTube thing I did where I wrote a book in 24 hours live on YouTube, and it was tons of fun. And I didn't quite finish the book. I hit 24,000 words, but I finished the book the next week, and it came out the beginning of March. And that's really easy for me to do, so to speak. But once you get past 60,000 words, all of a sudden there's a lot of little details that start to really, really matter. And the pantsing my way through a 120,000 word novel resulted in me writing a book every 7 months as opposed to a book every other month like I was doing in 2019. And so that's when I decided I really needed to buckle down and start learning plotting. And now I sort of found a way in between both of them.
Well, that's the thing when I was pantsing to get all those, because I wrote one book was 190,000 words, and to keep all those details in my head, I had to go back and reread what I'd written on a regular basis, and that took hours and hours, which is another thing. It took more time.
Plus, you have more editing you have to do, because when you go back and you're like, oh, okay, this thing in the beginning doesn't match the thing at the end, because you're pantsing, you change it halfway through.
I did what Dean Wesley Smith does, and I edited it when I reread. Does he call that the onion method, or somebody has a term for it, where you reread what you've written and you put in edits, and then you kind of build up momentum and get into the story as you do that?
I think he was saying at 20 books when he was there that he writes, and then if he comes to a bit, it's like, oh, I need to add something. Then he'll jump back and he writes that bit, and then he jumps around a lot in his books, but he pants definitely.
See, that for me, that'd be a recipe of disaster.
You see, I jump around a lot too, which is one of the main reasons that I transitioned to plotting versus pantsing. So what I used to do is write the first, I don't know, maybe like 8 chapters or so of a book, pantsing it, and then figure out where the story was going to go, and then go back, make revisions to those opening chapters, and then continue on. But once I had a larger universe I was writing in, or a series I was writing in, I needed to know where everything was going well in advance. And I've found that one of my main strategies when I get stuck somewhere is to just jump to a different scene. So then I would need to know what other scenes I could potentially be writing and how those would all fit in. So that's when I started putting together a rough scene-by-scene outline for a book in advance, which will often change a little bit over the course of the writing process. But having that guide, I could then be like, okay, well, I'm just going to jump to this point in the book and start writing that. So I can keep momentum going and then come back to this place where I'm stuck later and hopefully have some ideas for how to work through that.
I never do that.
Question?
Yeah, I couldn't do that either.
I never do that. I always write start to finish.
Yeah, me too.
I know I'm weird in that way.
There's
one of the reasons I wanted to be on this panel myself is because I know that I am a bit of an anomaly in that way, and a lot of people do write sequentially. So I wanted to say that yes, it is entirely possible to have a completely consistent book and write it fully out of order.
I actually do that, but we have a couple questions over here.
Okay.
So when those that are plotters, are we talking about 1 to 2 pages of general outline, or is this a 10 to 15 page outline with tons of bullet points? Just curious.
When I write about an 80,000 word book, I generally have 8 to 10,000 words in the outline. So
I usually have, I don't know how many words, but I usually have 2 to 3 pages of a paragraph per chapter, basically, is how I end up.
I don't plot out the chapters, not really. For me, books are about how they make you feel. And so when I start writing a book, I have to decide how I want this book to make you feel at the beginning, in the middle, and the end. And so that's why it was always really easy for me to pants, because I always knew what I was writing toward. I wasn't writing toward a specific event in the middle of the book. I was writing toward the betrayal in the middle of the book. I wasn't writing toward a specific event at the end of the book. I was writing toward the black moment where all hope is lost, because those are really easy to write to. So when I transitioned to plotting, and I call myself a pantser and a plotter because I still pants a lot, because I still don't outline each individual chapter. I haven't found a method that allows me to do that. and be creative while I'm doing it. But what I do is I go through and I hit all the highlights and all the high notes with one sentence. But the more important for me for the plotting isn't the story or what happens, it's the characters and how they interact with the story. So I have about a page for every main character that I've written. Motivations, needs, wants, that kind of thing. It sounds silly, but that's, because it's the most basic thing that people always tell you when you're writing is know what your character wants. But it really makes all the difference when you're pantsing to know exactly what your character's after and then be able to describe it in one sentence.
You need that for plotting too.
Well, yes.
Particularly
sure.
in the first book of a series. I
think you need it in every story. Yeah. But a lot of people don't have that, but they do have a story, because you can have a story and then you can put characters into a story, or characters and create the story around them.
Well,
in addition to the plot, I also have like 2 or 3 pages of a character bio, what they want, and all that. So it's not just that. And I think it's just what works for each individual, personally.
I approach it as the what each of the plot threads is going to be going through. So typically I'll start out with, it probably is about a 1 or 2 page of just the very high level, and then I'll expand that out and then break it. So eventually when I have a full outline, I have it as a scene by scene. And there are typically multiple scenes within chapters is how I do them. I do longer chapters with multiple scenes within them. But each of the chapters would have kind of a theme to them.
Do you have an average word count, Amy, for your chapters?
It really depends on the book. I'd say, generally speaking, 3,000 to 6,000 words. But some of the books that I've written have been more like 1,800 to 3,000.
I tend to, for a new series, like when it's the first book of a new series especially, I will write character sketch for each of the main characters, including the villains, and then I will go from there to a synopsis of the story. And only after I get a really detailed synopsis do I go to a chapter by chapter outline. And usually I will take like bits of the synopsis and just put like a sentence or 2 sentences by each chapter. And then I will go into that and expand on it, and usually go from 3 or 4 paragraphs per chapter before I'm done.
Mm-hmm.
So I kind of do similar to what Amy does. I outline about 10 to 30 chapters in advance. My books are on average about 130,000. They're big boys. And but my chapters are not set. I write in POVs, so each chapter is a new point of view. And the chapter is only as long as what the character needs to say or needs to show you. That being said, I think my last book had 111 chapters. Some were only 500 to 1,000 words, and some were 4,000.
My favorite
goes back and forth.
My favorite chapter of any book ever written was a book by J.A. Cipriano, and it was a 1-sentence chapter. And at the end of one chapter, it was they were asking the main character, "What are you going to do?" He's like, "I'm going to go kick their butt." And the next chapter was, "And then I kicked his butt." And that was the whole chapter. And I loved it so much because it was so surprising.
Didn't Jim Butcher have a chapter that was like a 2-word sentence or something in one of his books?
It's something you can pull off, but you've got to have a lot of confidence in your writing to pull it off, because it is comedic in a way.
Yeah,
so I was gonna say I tend to keep my chapters around the same length, but I think it's just because what readers have come to expect from me.
My chapters tend to start longer in the beginning of the book, and then get shorter as the book goes on, and then as it gets toward the end of the book, they get longer, but with more cuts for POVs. I have especially my military sci-fi that runs like 110, 115,000 words. Probably the last 35,000 words is the climax. So it's usually a really long, lead up to honestly like a 1-page ending. And so there's a lot of tension building up, and you can use POV cuts in chapters and in scenes to ramp up that tension and keep things going. And that's one of the things that, kind of switching to my hybrid system of plotting and pantsing. And part of that is that I use a program called Plotter, which has really, really helped my plotting.
Oh, yeah.
Plottr. And it's really amazing because it's a plotting, it helps you plot, but it also helps you build story Bibles at the same time, which is something I'm always terrible at. And I've got a 9-book superhero series, and I'm constantly having to dig through the books to find out, did I mention this name before? Like, I've had to go to my fans and be like, hey guys, did I kill this character or not? Because I can't remember. And so that really helps out a lot too, is keeping that story Bible while you're working on it. And so the plotting for me has really helped me craft the kind of story that I wanted to craft at the end, which is, you get all this tension, the entire story is building up to this one moment, and then you have that moment, and it's this awesome release, and then the story, is pretty much over at that point.
Yeah, I have a story Bible for every series. It's a separate document with, bits about the world. So if it's science fiction, I'm talking about technology, what they can and can't do. If same with magic, if it's science, if it's fantasy, what the magic can and can't do. And it all helps, inform the plot and all that. But my chapters, they vary wildly in length, but as Jeff was saying, it tends to lead up, and the last chapter tends to be like double the size of what my normal chapters are, because it's just putting everything in and just kind of big blowout moment, the big climax.
So Corey is asking, when you were pantsing, did you find that a lot more of the work you had written needed to be cut or rewritten?
I did not, but I kind of had it drummed into me through professional editors when I was trying to get traditionally published, how to keep things as spare as possible and not add a lot of dead weight that was going to have to be cut later. So I kind of had that as an instinct, but I can see where a lot of people who pants would probably have to do that.
Did you never write yourself into a corner?
I never did. I don't know why.
I did.
Yeah, I definitely had to do revisions back, but it was also my first book, so I think part of it was the first bookness as opposed to just being a pantsing situation. But I mean, I was also like 12, so I made choices that when I got older and had some better perspective were really bad choices for things. So I ended up stripping out a lot of stuff, but the original draft is hilarious.
You should put it out as a special edition.
I should. I'll just say horses on spaceship.
Horses on spaceships? So you could write for Star Wars.
Yeah.
Not for me, not so much. When I first started writing in 2016, when I first started becoming serious about publishing in the beginning of 2015, and then 2016, I first got introduced to writing, self-publishing, not first, but in a way, by Chris Fox and his 21-day novel challenge.
Oh, yeah.
And I wrote along with him every morning while he was writing, listening to his podcast, and then I was writing, and I decided I was going to get to this point where I could write a really clean draft. And for me, that's a big deal because I'm dyslexic and I have ADD. So it's super hard for me to write a clean draft without a lot of effort. And I hate editing. It's my least favorite thing to do in the book process. And so I try to make it so that my editing has to be minimal. So when I'm writing along and I come up with a better idea than I had when I first started the book, which is inevitable because of flow state, I'll make a note saying, okay, from this point forward, it's as if this thing happened earlier. And then once I get it back from my editor, because he does 2 passes, he does a story pass and then he does a cleanup pass. And once I get the story pass back from him, I make all the changes, and then he'll go through and help me clean it up. And then I'll do one more pass where I read through it and make sure that everything is good. And then he'll do a last pass because he's an anal retentive, awesome guy, and he just can't stand it when there's a typo that slips through. And then I send it off. So I try to keep the editing. I've done 14 novels that way, superhero novels that way, and they're all about 60,000 words. And I try to keep the editing to a minimum because especially when I first started writing, when you're trying to get a name for yourself and you're trying to make money, which was my main focus when I first started. It's not now. Speed is what makes that money. Getting a book out consistently every 3 months is what gets you fans and gets you people reading your books. You can do it a book a year. It's just a lot harder. And so writing a book every 3 months
better be good.
Yeah, it better be good. Not that mine's not, but
I'm just saying, if you write one book a year, it better be a heck of a book if you're going to keep your fans.
The audience I shoot for is like the whale audience, and I resisted for a long time putting any kind of glossary in my book because I kind of felt like for some reason that was cheap. I don't know why I felt that way. And then I had one of my fans tell me, he's like, listen, dude, I know you write a book every 3 months, but I have read 15 novels since I read your last book, 3 months ago. Can you please put a glossary in it so I remember what's going on? And so, yeah, I was like, wow, okay, well, and after taking a poll and talking to my readers, I learned that was the majority of them were people who read, 5 books a month. And, wow. Depending on how long it took me to get a book out, it could have been, 20 books ago.
Yeah.
And so that ended up being really helpful for them. And plotting and using world building techniques like, Bibles really make a difference when you're trying to do that. Because having to go back and revise what came before for 14 books was really, really difficult.
I wish I had a story Bible for my universes. It would make things easier.
Yeah, it's a lot of work to put those together. I have one for the Cataclysmverse now. As soon as I started bringing in co-authors, I really needed to make sure that I had everything squared away. So I think that's something like a 12,000 word document now.
I need one of those.
Yeah, and that doesn't even include character stuff. So at some point I need to go through and have some character threads in there, but that's just like tech and terminology.
I've got over 20 books in the same universe, and I have to admit I have made minor mistakes because I didn't remember things. And things like naming 2 different worlds and 2 different systems the same thing, or forgetting the date. The year things happen.
Yeah, I always hate when I accidentally reuse a name.
Yeah.
I used to put dates in my books, and now I'm moving away from that because it's just so hard to keep track of all the dates. So I try to be very vague on the date aspect of things.
Yeah.
But I tell you, not to plug Plotter again, but that I knew when I started a new series that I was going to plot, which was my military sci-fi, that I didn't want to make the same mistake I made with Arsenal and with Wraith, which is my vigilante superhero series, which was not having a Bible from the beginning. And so that program really helps you make a Bible right from the beginning, kind of seamlessly as you're plotting and coming up with the ideas and the stories and stuff like that. There is a place for everything. Before that, I was just using a Word document that I had open, and I just formatted it using styles to, okay, this is the world that I've made, and this is the technology, et cetera, et cetera. But having all that in one place, it's easy to access alongside with characters and not having to have 6 Word documents open or forget about a Word document.
Yeah, that's what I do is I have, I've got a dictionary for my made up words. I've got another document where cool. I've copy and pasted descriptions of everyone. That way, if I'm trying to remember what color someone's freaking eyes are,
I need that.
I can just, and I've got it, with the heading. So I don't have to search for a name. I just scroll down the list, which is alphabetical, and it tells me everything I need to know. So I have like maybe 12 Word documents that are about my world. But yeah, it would be great if they were all in one place. That would be.
See, I always am forgetting that I made stuff. And so I'll forget to open Word documents. And all of a sudden I've written half a book without looking at any of the Word documents. And they're like, oh, yeah, I already came up with this.
When I start writing in the morning, I have literally like 12 Word documents open, and I leave them open. So all I have to do is when I close my laptop, they all go back to this screen. So all I have to do is put them on the screen they're supposed to be on. And I know the books are on this screen. The supporting documents are on my third screen. And it makes it easier for me. But having it in one place would probably make it a lot easier.
Yeah, I just have the 3. So I have my main, my work, my book open. I've got my synopsis and I've got my story Bible, and I update that as I write. So if I introduce a new character, like the book I was just doing today, I just came up with a new character on the fly as I was going. So I suppose I do a little bit of pantsing bits, and it was like I always try to make sure I update that as I go. It's like, right, I need to add him in. So what's he look like?
I just keep my main document and then the outline open.
See, I put my outline in my main document and delete it as I go. So I mean, I have a copy of it, so I can go back and reference it if I need to. But I break it out and just put it in brackets, and so I know that, and then I put in my scene breaks in there. So when I have completed all of the notes that I had for that scene, then I'll delete that text.
And that's what I do.
Christina, how much of your I'm sorry, I'm asking a question, but I hope it's okay. How much of your Bible and your plotting is based on the real world locations from 200 and some odd years ago, and how important is that to your stories?
So I have my own world and my own universe. I don't write in our world.
Oh, okay. So it's second world fantasy then. So it's a whole other world. Oh, gotcha.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. And I do use things that happen in our history influence ours. So I don't know if you're familiar with the War of the Roses or the Cousins War. I actually have a cousin civil war that kind of happens in book 2 and carries over to book 3.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah. So I don't know if anyone's picked up on that. I've mimicked the War of the Roses in it, although I'm condensing it down to a 2-year span instead of the many years that the real Cousins War spanned. So we have another question about pantsing. When you switched from pantsing to plotting, was it hard? Was there an adjustment period or a method that worked better than others?
I switched I'm sorry, go ahead, Jeff.
Oh, no, you got it, Rick.
When I switched, it was kind of almost by accident. I was writing a prequel to a trilogy, and in this trilogy, I had referenced the main character's experience in a war many times, and thrown like little vignettes from the war in. So I thought I should tell that story, and I had all these details already written in 3 different books. And when I put them together, and then I just added what was left of the story from there, and kind of accidentally outlined it. And the fact that it only took 3 months gave me the clue that I should probably try doing that again. So it's kind of gradual in that way.
See, for me, pantsing has never been about discovery writing, which a lot of people use as a synonym for pantsing, but it's not exactly the same thing. To me, discovering the story is not exciting. What works for me is getting into flow state when I'm writing. And flow state is that place you get to where the ideas are just, rapid fire off, and they're not bad ideas. They're not low-hanging fruit. They're not the first thing that comes to mind. They're the 3rd or 4th or 5th thing, and they're all really, really good. John Cleese has a video on open mode on YouTube that I recommend every writer watch. It's really, really great. He's several, actually, and it's all about him and Benny Hill and how he'd show up to work every day in a suit and a tie, and comedy is serious business, and he'd work for 8 hours, and Benny Hill would be laughing the entire time and telling jokes, and he'd be done by 2, And John Cleese finally figured out what it was is that Benny was in open mode and John was in closed mode. In closed mode, you're a problem solver. You're solving problems. You're not being creative. And so I grew up being taught outlines are, okay, point 1, ABC, point 2, ABC. And so for years, I tried to outline stories that way, and it just was a grind. And my wife can attest to how many books I started and threw down in frustration because I was trying to plot it. And finally I said, you know what, I'm just going to write it. And then I would just write it. So it took me, every book I've written, I've tried to plot first and failed. And so I just pantsed it. And it took me until like this year really to fully get on board with plotting and finally write a book based on a plot and have it work. I'm like 35 or 40,000 words into my book 3 of my military sci-fi series, and I plotted the whole thing out, and it's coming along beautifully. So, and the trick to that was figuring out a way to be in that creative open mode while I was plotting. And that's sort of, I can't tell you how to do that, but that's sort of what you need to, where you need to be. If you find yourself having trouble plotting and all the ideas you're coming up with suck, you need to find a way to be in that creative mode while you're plotting, and then the plot will work.
Well, yeah, that's the thing. Pantsing, you're telling the story. And when you're plotting, when you're outlining, you're telling the story to yourself too, but you're telling it in kind of a around the campfire kind of way. Like he did this and then he did that and he went there and did this, instead of in a dialogue way, and like in a script, you're just telling you the basics of the story when you outline. So it's the same kind of creative flow.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons that I started doing the method of just coming up with a really, really high level idea first, and sort of those main big beats that I needed to hit, and then working out the details as an iterative process going through it. And I think that has helped me get in that creative space. So I could just think, okay, so I know this is roughly where I want to go with everything. And then when you have those shower ideas, as we all know, where you're just kind of at that open state. So then I could be thinking through, so how do we get from that point B to point C in the story? Because I know that I need to go there, but like, what's the creative way that I can go about that? And then as I have those ideas, I'll flesh out that outline to get it.
I had my best idea, I kid you not, in an MRI machine.
Nice.
You couldn't move.
I just zoned out for 45 minutes and was developing story ideas in the MRI, and then I sat in my car after I got out and made notes on my phone so I didn't forget it.
Yeah, I'm either shower or when I first wake up in the morning and I'm laying in bed and haven't quite gotten up and just kind of starting the day. I often have a lot of ideas then.
I'm an extrovert, so my best ideas usually come when I'm like jazzed up and talking to people, and like my wife and I talk about story all the time. And so I think my best idea I ever came up with was the first year I was at 20 Books, and I had just met Amy and Mal Cooper and Andrew, and we were staying up till 3 o'clock in the morning talking about all the awesome things. Yeah, good times. I got so sick after that. And the second night, I was like the middle of the night, and I came up with just the absolute best idea I've ever had for superhero stuff. And I started telling people, I'm like, okay, I got this idea for a superhero novel. Here's the one line. What do you think? And everybody had the same reaction. And I knew, because they all had that same reaction, that it was gold. And so when you come up with an idea like that, it's really important to write it down and remember it, because, that's pantsing, but that's also plotting. And, that idea spawned an entire book series that has, made me, some money.
So you were talking about getting, oh, go ahead.
I was saying, is that your Full Metal?
No, that I came up with sitting in the counter because I wanted to write a superhero book. And I was really, really tired of not having a book that was selling and making money. No, it was The Wraith. And the idea was if the Punisher and the Batman had a baby raised by John Wick. And that's the response I get from everybody, right? Because it's a cool idea. And so,
I'll have to tell my husband about that one.
When you have, when you have that kind of reaction, both internally and externally, you've got gold there and you need to run with it.
So when you were talking about getting into the flow state, I recently, I'm sure y'all are all familiar with sprinting on Discord. Mm-hmm. I actually have my own server that I sprint in that my readers watch me write. And there are some of them that get on every single day to check my word counts and cheer me on, which is really great. But my editor also sprints editing with me sometimes. And I got into that flow state a couple weeks ago. And usually in like a 35, 40-minute sprint, I can get up into the 700-800s word count. But I did 1,700 words in 35 minutes because I had gotten into that flow state. And she was like, "Are you sure that's the accurate word count?" I was like, "I checked it 3 times."
Wow.
Do you need some burn cream? Because you're on fire.
Oh, yeah. It was, I kept going until I think like 10 o'clock that night. I stopped and cooked dinner, got the kids to bed, and then got back. And it's, I do that mix of, I'm a plotster, I guess. So I give, I do my 10 to 20 chapters ahead. 1 or 2 sentences of outline. That's all it is. You know, and one of my outline was like, this bitch and her shit, her meddling shit. And I had no idea what I was going to do when I got to her. I just knew that we needed to check in with that character. But like Amy does, if I get stuck, I have options to go ahead and work with characters that I really know well and then come back to something. And that's what had happened is I was stuck. So I went to a relatively new character for me. And there's these 2 characters in my 3rd book. One of them was introduced. They were both introduced in book 3 or 2, but one was introduced at the end. And when I get these 2 characters together in any scene, my word counts explode. And to the point where if these women were in real life, I would not want them to be solving a problem about me because they are scary. And some of the best world building that I've done in this book has happened when these 2 characters get together.
That's great. That's awesome.
Cool.
Yeah, that's one of those things that I think having, even if you do have an outline that you put together, if you find that there's just this magic that happens in certain things, be open to making changes in your manuscript and run with the things that feel really fun to you, because the readers are going to respond to that as well.
That was
Absolutely.
Master Isra in book 1. That she was supposed to come in for the one battle scene and then go away. She's still with me in book 3.
I've had characters like that where you introduce a character just for like, oh, I'm just going to introduce this character to fill this gap, and all of a sudden that character just takes on a life of its own, and you're like, well, okay, this guy is in there forever now.
Yep.
I had a character I wrote as a red shirt for a fan as a favor, just intending for them to be in one book and get killed off. And not only did they stay in all 4 books of the series as a main character, but then they were in a sequel trilogy as one of the main characters. Take on a life of their own.
I've got this fan whose name is Rutabaga, and I just love his name so much. His actual name is Rutabaga. And he won a contest where you get to be in one of my books. And so he became like this construction worker superhero who worked for the main character. And him and his daughter, who's like 15 or 16, just read it and just died. They loved it so much. He ended up being in the rest of the books after that. Just, tangentially, but it was a way to build kind of loyalty with your fans, for one, is if they are consent to it, obviously. And 2, it's just such a cool name and memorable, kind of character.
Good name. Yeah. Plotting, I mean, for me, because you said one of your favorite states, parts, Jeff, is the flow state. And I agree. I love getting in that state, but I also love plotting as well. It's definitely one of my favorite things where I'm kind of brainstorming a story and coming up with those little twists. And, if I lay this seed here and then it kind of, grows to fruition at this point, and then they suddenly realize something, I really enjoy kind of that problem solving aspect to it and figuring out how they get from A to B to C and all that. And, so I love both. I love the plotting side, but I also do really enjoy getting into that flow state and, where you're just in with the characters and you're just in the zone and really going for it. So, yeah.
A lot of writing and being successful as an author is just hacking your own human psychology and getting yourself to do things that, you wouldn't normally do. For instance, getting up every morning. Amy, I know you write at night, but I'm a morning person. And so I get up at 6 every morning and I write for 4 hours or whatever, rain or shine, whether I want to or not. And now I've gotten to the point after 5 years of doing that I cannot sleep in, even on Sundays. I just can't sleep in. So a lot of it is just making yourself like doing things that you may have not liked originally. And I think that's what happened with me with writing, where I went from I don't like the actual act of writing to I love the act of writing. And I just need to do that with editing and with plotting, to the point where my brain is like, okay, I'm ready to go. I love this. Let's do it.
My biggest issue with time right now is the fact that we have had all 6 people in our home have been here since March of last year, and no one ever leaves.
I'm glad
as much as I wish they would. But I actually, I'm sure you can tell, have had to move my office into my bedroom so that I have a place away from everyone else because I need silence to work. I can never get up at 6 a.m. For a variety of reasons. Mornings are made of sunshine and evil.
Well, that's what Adderall and 5-hour energy is for.
So we have another question. Whether
Yeah.
you're plotting or pantsing, do you have a specific ending in mind that you work towards achieving, or do you let it take you where it leads itself?
Sorry, go ahead.
I have two points in mind. I know my ending and I know the midpoint twist. And those are the two anchors that I have, and then everything else is built around those. So the second half of my book always goes a lot better than the first half. And so it's a very slow start for me as I'm getting to that midpoint. But as soon as I hit the midpoint, and then I can easily go to the end and push through.
I always call that end of the book writing downhill because it just feels like you're just being pushed through the end of the book.
The momentum.
I always have an end written in, my outline, but it isn't always the end I finally go with, because I do change things from the outline sometimes, and a lot of times the end of the book is different than I envisioned it.
Yeah, and I will say that I know my ending. It's like there is a battle, and that is what I have in my outline. And the specifics of what that battle actually ended up being are fully open, and I'll see how the story sets up for that.
I never know but beforehand who's going to die in the book, because I have killed off main characters just because it felt like it was the right progression of events.
I'm still salty about that death in the first book of Drop Troopers.
Oh, sorry about that.
Yeah, I only have 6 save characters in my series, and I think only 2 people know who all 6 are. So what about you, Andrew? You are obviously a big plotter, so I'm sure you know exactly your ending.
I think I've always plotted. I think right from the start, it just felt natural to me. I used to, before I started getting into kind of actually writing novels, I used to DM games, role-playing games, that kind of thing, Dungeons and Dragons, Vampire, Mage. Those were my go-tos, and so I was always coming up with plots and ideas, and and I always had to be flexible because 9 times out of the 10 I'd want the characters to go this way, but they'd always go that way because that's just people.
You really need not to kill this NPC. Oh,
yes.
You killed him.
Oh no, don't kill him. Yeah, that kind of thing. So I've always been a plotter, but that said, I mean, there's always little bits of pantsing. I'm not stuck completely rigidly to the story, but I always have an ending in mind. I always know, basically where it's going to one degree or another. Because I also have a pen name where I write crime thrillers, and crime thrillers being what they are, you have to really know where you're going, who did it, because you need to plant seeds to lead people away from who did it, and then there's that reveal at the end where it's like, oh, it's that person, and the plots for those tend to be much bigger. With each chapter having much more detail, whereas my plots for my urban fantasy or whatever can just be a couple of sentences for each chapter, very, very short. But yeah, I always have an ending in mind. I recently finished a post-apoc series, and a pantsing part of that was partway through, as I was writing the book, I suddenly realized that I could tie a bunch of things back to the first book, to a bunch of things that happened in book 1, and this was book 5, and it was like some light bulb moments. It's like, oh, if I do that, then that links back to book 1, and it's almost as if they've come full circle. I planned it, obviously. Yes, I didn't just come up with it on the fly. No,
I definitely had some of those too.
That's your open.
I recently had to.
Yeah, I just laying seeds, and then as I'm writing the last book, it just suddenly kind of blooms into a flower, and it's like, oh, that's why I wrote that, of course. Yeah.
So I find it interesting that a couple of us started writing through role playing. My first novel actually was backstory for my role play character in the early days of AOL role play.
Oh, okay.
When I was a teenager, I was in an accident, and that's how I spent my time. Is I did role play on AOL, and my first book, which is over there hidden, and I don't think I'm gonna ever let anyone see it. It was written in spiral notebooks.
Yeah,
my
first novel was that it was it was a character from my role playing games who was my kind of DM character who always was with the characters, my player character standing, so to speak. And I had a story, and so when I stopped role playing, she was always in my head. She kept turning up in my head and giving me ideas and things, and I just ended up saying, right, I've just got to write this down. So I had to kind of extract her from that world, create a brand new world around her that was very influenced by, the world she was from. But I mean, I had to come up with my own world, and it kind of grew from there and became this urban fantasy kind of 7-book, the green books up there, the 7-book series. And that was my first series. It all came from Dungeons and Dragons. Not from Dungeons and Dragons, but role playing, Vampire Mage, and those kind of storyteller games. That's where that came from.
See, I played a lot of Dungeons and Dragons and Shadowrun, and Shadowrun was always my favorite. So I wrote a lot of Shadowrun short stories based around characters I created throughout the years. And for me, playing any RPG, the funnest part is always making the character and what makes them tick and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And since I'm almost always the DM or game master at any given time, I didn't actually get to play these characters. I just made them, and then every once in a while I get to play them and be sorely disappointed at everybody else's storytelling. And then go back to being the DM. What's interesting is I found when I started writing that all my desire to play those RPGs kind of went out the window, because all my creative focus for that storytelling wasn't being spent on a story for players every week. It was being spent on a book. And I even had an ongoing D&D game at the time when I first kind of hit it as a writer, and I would tell them, like, listen, I got to finish this book, so we can't play D&D for a few months. And now we unfortunately don't play any RPGs anymore, just because I feel like if I'm doing anything luxuriously storytelling with my time, like playing an online computer game or playing a tabletop game, I feel guilty because I should be using that creative juice to write. So I end up just playing first-person shooters instead of anything important.
No story, just shoot people.
I recently stopped. I used to run a lot of play-by-post role-play games, often in Discord, where I would build a world, build a magic system, and then people would create characters, and we would all play together. So I was still getting to play. But like you said, I was just putting so much of my time and energy into these play-by-posts. I'd stop because I needed to focus my energy on my own storytelling.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Even when I'm watching binge watching a series or anything, I try to be really actively engaged in it from a plotting perspective and be tracking the character arcs and the overall plot threads and try to learn something from it, partially so I don't feel as guilty taking the time. Though I do think it is important to have those moments to refill the creative tank and take in some new content. That often sparks ideas. But I do think there is a lot to be learned, and we do have the benefit of the online streaming thing now and being able to watch an entire 8-episode miniseries in the course of a couple days if you want to, and really be involved in the story and be able to dissect it. And looking at things in a different medium, I think, can be a fun way to then come back into the book in narrative form and bring some things.
And be constantly disappointed in the media you're watching.
Yeah, that is part of it. Just like, wow, I would have done it this way. That would have been so much cooler.
It's like, how did you get this job?
Yeah, so I usually write from about 10 o'clock in the morning till 4:30 in the afternoon. I am the main cook in our house. I have a lot of food allergies, and no one has yet learned how to cook from scratch. So I have to go into the kitchen and cook, but they ban me from helping clean up. So while everybody else is cleaning up, I come back in and tie up any loose ends from the workday until it's time to put the kids down. And then I usually spend the evening with my husband or my aunt refilling that creative tank, because it really is important as storytellers. And you shouldn't feel guilty refilling your creative tank, because we have to.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if we burn ourselves out working 15 hours a day, after a year or so, that's you just can't keep doing that.
No,
yeah, and no matter if you're a plotter or a pantser, I think being able to just be in that open mindset and be taking in new ideas, and so even if it's in a completely different genre, there are still some little, like a character quirk or some sort of twist in there that you can incorporate and bring it into your own work.
Yeah, I can test the burnout thing. I did a book every 3 months for 3 years, and I hit a wall January of last year, right before the pandemic started, and slammed face first into it. And I couldn't write for a few months because of it, and it was really frustrating. I knew I couldn't keep that pace up forever, so I wasn't delusional in thinking I could. But I really wanted to get my career off with a bang too, and that was the way to do it. And it worked. I mean, it worked. I released a book in 2019, and I've released a book, in 2020, and I've released a book in 2021. So there are consequences to it.
Hmm.
It's, really understanding, building a doable schedule for yourself is a big deal. For me, my biggest hurdle is my health. I have a lot of health issues, and that slows me down, and I have to give myself grace on those bad days to just do self-care. And I refill my creative tank on those days that I just can't work. And like Amy says, it's really good to read someone else's writing or to watch a show and pull elements. And even though on those days where I may not write, I'm making notes for my own story. And that.
One of the guidance I always give first-time authors is if you can't write for a day, be thinking about writing for that day. Because you should be writing every day, but if you can't write every day, think about writing. If you can't think about writing, do something storytelling related so that you're keeping your writing brain engaged, even if it's a neutral. Because once you break the habit of thinking about writing and writing, it's really hard to get it back.
Yeah. I went through that with my first book. I actually wrote it over 6 years. It was terrible because I would leave it for months at a time and then come back and overwrite. And I actually ended up archiving it and rewriting the book from memory, which was some advice that another author friend of mine gave. And I wrote it while my husband was deployed. And I was home alone with 3 kids, so that was fun.
Yeah, it's you're right, Jeff. Because I mean, I went on, away for a few days with the family, and it can often take me just a couple of days to get back into that. The first couple of days, I'll really want to write, but you sit in that chair, and sometimes it just doesn't flow. It doesn't happen, and I end up frustrated. But I have to think, no, it's fine. I just need to give myself a couple of days to get back into that flow again, and just find that place again, because it is, you get out of it. You just I love having time with the family and refilling those creative juices, but sometimes it can just slow you down a little bit.
For me, the hardest part when I've had a break is outlining. Writing really doesn't take that much effort if I have a good outline, but if sitting down and trying to outline when I'm burned out creatively is really difficult, because that's the part where I put most of my creative juices into, and try to get that flow going with the story. Like I said, telling somebody across a campfire what your story's about. And if I'm burned out creatively, then the outline just doesn't want to come. I can just stare at the paper for an hour and not write anything.
So Corey is saying Tolkien warned off pantsing. It's a dangerous business, Frodo, going out your doors. You step onto the road and if you
And if you
don't
don't keep your feet, there's no knowing where you might be swept off to.
So
Yeah.
I have dyslexia too, and mine is triggered from reading aloud.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, I forget sometimes, and I turn my work into my editor with the pink background and in Comic Sans, and he freaks out. He's like, "What are you doing to me?" Cut down on the typos is what it does.
Yeah. No, I just blow mine up really big so that it fills my 24-inch monitor, and I'm fine. But my dyslexia is actually worse when I try to read aloud, and I also need to get my eyes checked, and that font is small.
Yes, it is.
Pantsing can be fine as long as if you know your strengths when it comes to pantsing. If you know what your strengths are and what your weaknesses are, that's probably the most important part about pantsing and having it turn out well. A lot of problems, authors fall into two categories in my experience. Incredibly self-sabotaging about their work. Oh, it's terrible, it's horrible. Or it's, oh, my work is just the greatest thing ever. This is the next bestseller. And if you don't like it, well, you just don't know what good is. And the key to being an author, to being a successful author, is to being able to self-evaluate your work and look at it and go, okay, what is wrong with this? Where do I need to improve? So if you are pantsing and you can do that, you're going to be okay. You know, it can be tough. And it might work great for you for a 100,000 word novel where it doesn't work for me. But you really honestly have to be able to know where you need to improve. And you can't rely on other people telling you, because people are fantastic observers and terrible interpreters. They can read your book and go, oh, your characters are terrible, when your characters are actually really great. They just didn't believe how they interacted with the plot. And so that rubbed them the wrong way. So you have to really be able to self-evaluate as a pantser and know where your weaknesses are in your book and how to fix them. Because one of the things that pantsing does is it creates a pace for your book that is usually much quicker than other books.
See, I don't agree. I don't agree that there's only those two, because I have been alternatively both of those places on the same book. This is the best thing ever. Oh no, this sucks.
But that's the on-off switch, though. I mean, I'm not saying you're always one or always the other, but that's usually the two states. Very rarely is it like, this book has good parts and it has bad parts. I'm a good writer. I need to improve here, here, and here. Usually it's like, oh, I am the greatest thing ever and I'm on fire. Or it's like, oh, I can't believe people pay me for this.
Yeah. It took me a long time to have the courage to self-publish. Actually, Mallory Cooper is the one that really gave me the push, and she's been so helpful in helping me along the journey. Her and her wife especially. But up until I put the book out, I still thought I was terrible, and I had no idea why I was doing it. And then people started responding and telling me it was good, and I was like, okay, so maybe I should keep doing this.
It's always the arbiter is the reader, right? The reader comes back and tells you, hey, I love this book. Even if it's just one person, that's one person who loved what you did.
Yeah. Oh, my editor was really helpful in that too. As she was editing the book, she leaves comments on the side, and as many books as she's edited, I thought, well, if she thinks this is good, I might have a chance.
Yeah, I was disabused of the notion that I was the best writer ever long before I self-published, because, as I said, back in the late 90s, I tried to have my first two books traditionally published. I had an agent, and she had like 4 different editors on me, and then they both got rejected by a whole bunch of people. So I pretty much knew from the beginning I wasn't the best writer ever, and I never thought I was the worst either. So I guess I probably thought I was the best when I first started out, and then I had myself disabused of that notion and kind of like was in the middle.
Well, that's
we all get those 1-star reviews.
Yeah.
At some point.
Yeah.
And that's the truth of the business. You don't have to be the best writer ever.
No.
You just have to be good. It's good enough for someone to enjoy. And that's the trap everybody falls into, is thinking they have to be this. They delay publishing because they think they have to be this great writer, this mythical great writer that doesn't actually exist.
Perfect is the enemy of the good enough.
Yeah. instead of being the writer that is, hey, this is my first book. It's probably not going to be Eisner Award-winning novel, but hey, maybe the fifth one will be. And you've got to learn as you go along. I remember reading an article by Orson Scott Card where he talked about how damaging it was to have Ender's Game be his first novel, because how do you follow up Ender's Game?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm. Yeah.
It's like Andy Weir with The Martian.
Yeah. How do you follow up greatness?
How do you follow it? Absolutely. Yeah.
I mean, I'm sure the hundreds of millions of dollars he has now is probably something.
Sting out of it a bit.
He's crying all the way to the bank.
Yeah. Yeah. That softens the blow a bit, but yeah, I agree. I mean, I think those of us that have to work a bit harder and, build to it, I think we'd probably find it a little easier to write the next book. But those that knock it out the park on book one, it's like those that make, get the Oscars, the actors that get the Oscars for their first film, that kind of, it makes it really, it's harder to go out there again with the risk of someone going.
You're competing against yourself.
Yeah, you're competing against yourself, yes.
When you fail a couple of times, you tend to know better what works than someone who just succeeds right out the gate. So I'm glad it took me I wrote three novels. I know it doesn't sound like a lot, but I wrote 3 novels and 3 novellas before I had a book that actually started selling. And so I learned a lot. I took the lessons I learned from those books and applied it further. And that's why I've always wanted to move to plotting, because I knew, listening to other authors talk and seeing other books, that eventually, if I wanted to get the success I wanted to get, I was going to have to plot books. Because 60,000 word novels are great. People love them. But I have to keep writing them if I want to keep selling them.
Yeah.
And I want to write a book series that people are still reading, 10 years from now and loving it because it was so well crafted. And, I want another series after that where I do that, and then one after that. And you can only write off the cuff so long before you start losing, I've used up all my off the cuff ideas, and that's kind of where I ended up ending my Arsenal book series at book 9 with a solid ending. Because the idea of writing a 10th one, I couldn't think of anything to do with the character at that point. Because I'd used up everything that I could think of to do along the way. And that's why I like transitioning to plotting, where I can be like, okay, this is exactly how I want everything to work, and this is how I want things to feel. And these, I use a lot of historical events in my sci-fi, and just rebrand them, and that way, like Andrew was saying, like when you get to book 3 or whatever, you can kind of go back through and you can see all the threads and everything you put together. And it's really hard to do that when you're pantsing.
Yeah.
You kind of have to rely on luck, and luck is not a plan.
I have my next 20 novel ideas planned out.
Wow.
Amy's seen part of it. It's actually grown since you saw the list, but yeah. I have the next 2 series that are spinoffs from this one, and then I've got prequel series. I mean, because you're right, the off-the-cuff ideas, you can only have so many of them. And every time I get an idea for a book, I put it in one document, at least for this world. I have several other folders for other ideas. I have one that I wrote I wrote the first chapter in early 2019 that I had to scrap because it was about a flu from China that wiped out half the world.
That sounds like pure fiction.
Yeah.
I don't believe that can happen.
So I COVID stole that idea from me. I don't think I'll ever write it, but I actually had like the first chapter of it written, and so.
I have a lit RPG I wrote in 2017 that isn't published, and I keep wanting to do something with it, but I'm not a lit RPG author, and I'm not moving into that domain. So I wrote it because I wanted to write something so completely different. And that one was fairly well plotted out because I knew exactly how everything was going to go, because I read a lot of lit RPGs. But one of the things you have to do as an author is you have to really nail down and focus in on genre. Because if you're publishing a book from a different genre every month, you're hurting yourself. That's not the best way to get successful. You want to focus And I know there's a lot of authors who are successful who did that, but there are 100 times as many who do that and they're not.
Yeah.
You could put it out under a pen name, maybe as a collaboration with somebody who's known for lit RPG.
Well, then I'd have to write 2 more. And I've got no time for that right now. But yeah, I actually do have plans to put that out with a certain person who's named after a series of pair of states. But that's down the road.
A series of pair of states?
Yeah, Dakota.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
I was thinking like his first and last name were different states.
That's kind of what I was thinking.
I was trying to be vague, and then I realized I didn't need to be.
Carolina, California.
Yeah.
Cool.
Well, it seems like we've kind of hit a natural. We've wrapped up the questions, so I'm going to let each of you tell us where you can find your books. Starting with Amy.
Right, you can find out everything about me at amyduboff.com, and all my stuff's on Amazon and in Kindle Unlimited.
And Rick?
I am on Amazon under Rick Partlow. I'm pretty much the only author under that name. Also, you can go to rickpartlow.com or facebook.com/dutyhonorplanet.
Andrew?
You can find me on Amazon under Andrew Dobell, or go to my website at andrewdobellauthor.co.uk to find my books.
And Jeffrey?
My name is my website, jeffreyhaskell.com, and you can also find me on Amazon. Tantor Media does my audiobooks for both Arsenal and Wraith, and they're both available digitally everywhere audiobooks are sold, and, as I've just found out recently, on CD. So if you go to tantor.com, you can find my books on CD, which I thought was pretty cool.
If you live in the 20th century.
I know, right? I just was like... Yeah, okay.
Actually, that's good to know, because a lot of people don't know you can take books on CD with you to MRIs and they will play them for you. You can't hook up. Yeah, I've had about 13 MRIs this year and have taken books on CD with me to every single one.
I noticed at my local truck stop, there are still plenty of books on CD for sale that the truckers use. So, because not everywhere has internet. But yeah, so, and also on Amazon.com. I'm exclusive through Kindle Unlimited, and then you can find my future military sci-fi series, The Grimm's War, which will probably be out at the end of the year, on Amazon and everywhere books are sold.
Like everyone else, you can go to myname.com, so ChristinaGruel.com, and I'm also on Amazon and Kindle Unlimited. So thank you, everyone, for joining us for Plotting versus Pantsing. I learned some new stuff from this panel. I hope everyone watching did as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, if you like that panel and you're looking to continue your author journey,
or if you're just looking for a group of like-minded people,
all striving to improve their craft and grow as authors, our community at KSM might just be what you're looking for
some reading, writing, and everything in between.
Come on over and join us at Keystroke Medium.